Sir, I'm going to need you to step back. This is a restricted military funeral and you're not on the clearance list. The young Marine guard barely looked up from his tablet, his finger swiping through names with practiced indifference. James Morrison stood perfectly still, his 81-year-old frame supported by a carved wooden cane that had seen better decades. "I served with Colonel Richardson," James said quietly, adjusting the faded black beret on his head. "Phoenix Squadron. Cambodia, 1969. The guard snorted. "Phoenix Squadron? Sir, I've checked 3 databases. That unit doesn't exist in any military record." He looked up now, a smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. "Maybe you're confused. The heat does things to people at your age." Behind the gates of Arlington National Cemetery, rows of white chairs filled with decorated officers. The funeral was about to begin. If you believe no veteran should be denied their final goodbye, type the word honor in the comments below. This story reveals why some heroes were never meant to exist. James didn't argue. He simply stepped back from the gate, finding a position just beyond the security checkpoint where he could still see the flag-draped casket in the distance. The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured grass, and the scent of fresh-cut lawn mixed with the diesel fumes from the escort vehicles. He'd driven 14 hours straight to get here. His arthritis screamed with every mile, his prosthetic leg, the one nobody could see beneath his pressed khakis, clicked softly with each step. But a promise was a promise. The guard returned to his post, occasionally glancing at James with mild annoyance. "Sir, you can't loiter here. This is an active security zone." "I'm not loitering," James replied, his voice steady. "I'm paying respects." "To someone from a unit that doesn't exist?" James reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a photograph, edges worn soft from handling. 5 men in unmarked uniforms, faces painted black, standing in front of a Huey helicopter with no identification numbers. "We existed," he said quietly. "We just weren't supposed to." The guard didn't even look at the photo. "Sir, without proper clearance." 54 years ago, James interrupted softly. "Colonel Richardson, though he was Lieutenant Richardson then, carried me 2 miles through jungle after a mine took my leg. 2 miles under fire when the mission parameters said to leave wounded behind." The young Marine's expression shifted slightly, less smirk, more discomfort. But orders were orders. "I'm sorry for your loss, but Phoenix Squadron," James continued as if the guard hadn't spoken, "ran 117 missions that never happened, in a country we were never in, fighting an enemy we never engaged. 18 men went in. 5 came back. And now," he looked toward the casket, "now there's just me." A small crowd had gathered near the gate, other funeral attendees, curious about the old man being turned away. Some whispered among themselves. A few took photos with their phones. One woman in a crisp Navy uniform studied James intently, her eyes narrowing at something she saw. The guard's supervisor, a staff sergeant with intelligent eyes, approached. "Is there a problem here, Lance Corporal?" "Gentleman claims to be part of some phantom unit, Staff Sergeant. No clearance, no verification. I've explained multiple times." "What unit?" the Staff Sergeant asked, turning to James. "Phoenix Squadron, Special Activities Division, Cambodia, Laos, North Vietnam, 1968 to 1970. The Staff Sergeant's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. He pulled out his own device, typed rapidly, then frowned. "There's no record." "There wouldn't be," James said simply. "We were sheep-dipped so thoroughly our own mothers wouldn't have recognized our service records. CIA ran us through Mac VSOG, but we reported directly to—" He paused, glancing at the civilians nearby. "Well, to people who didn't officially exist either." The photograph trembled slightly in James's weathered hand. The tremor was new, started about 6 months ago. Time was winning the war that Charlie never could. "I need you to move along, sir," the staff sergeant said, though his tone had softened. "I'm sorry, but without verification." James nodded slowly. "I understand. You're doing your job." He turned slightly, looking for a place to stand where he could still see. "I'll be over there." I promised Rich I'd see him off. Promised all of them, actually. Last man standing carries the memories. He limped toward a small rise about 50 yards from the gate, each step deliberate despite the pain. Behind him, the Navy woman in the crisp uniform touched the staff sergeant's arm, whispering urgently. The staff sergeant's eyes widened slightly, but James didn't see it. He was already taking up position on the small hill, standing at attention as best his 81-year-old body would allow. In the distance, the honor guard was preparing. The rifles gleamed in the morning sun. But what James didn't know was that someone else was watching from the VIP section. Someone whose blood had just run cold at the mention of Phoenix Squadron. 20 minutes passed. The funeral proceedings had begun, the chaplain's voice carrying faintly across the cemetery grounds. James remained at attention on his small hill, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead despite the cool morning air. The lance corporal who'd turned him away kept glancing over, obviously annoyed. Finally, he strutted over, his youth and authority combining into something ugly. "Sir, I told you to move along. This is getting ridiculous." James didn't break position. "I'm on public ground, son, and I'm not disturbing anyone." "You're disturbing me." The guard moved closer, close enough that James could smell the starch in his uniform. "What is this? Some kind of stolen valor thing? Trying to get attention with made-up war stories?" For the first time, James's composure cracked slightly. His jaw tightened. "Stolen valor?" "Yeah, Phoenix Squadron." The guard made air quotes. "Sounds like something out of a bad movie. What's next? You gonna tell me you were a space door gunner too?" "Lance Corporal Martinez," James read from the guard's name tape. "Have you ever heard of MACV-SOG?" "Sure, Military Assistance Command, Vietnam, Studies and Observations Group, Special Ops. Close. What you just recited is what they told Congress. What it really stood for was Military Assistance Command, Vietnam, Special Operations Group. The Studies and Observations part was cover." James's eyes never left the distant casket. And Phoenix Squadron was so far off the books, even MACV-SOG barely knew we existed. Martinez laughed, actually laughed. "Right, super-secret squirrel stuff? Let me guess. You can't prove any of it because it's all classified?" "No," James said quietly. "I can't prove it because everyone who could verify it is dead. Rich was the last one besides me." "Convenient." James finally turned to look at the young Marine. Really looked at him. And Martinez took an involuntary step back at what he saw in those eyes. "Convenient," James repeated softly. "You want to know what's convenient, Lance Corporal? Convenient is serving in a war where your casualties get counted, where your wounded get medevaced, where your dead get their names on a wall. We didn't get any of that." He pulled up his left sleeve slightly, revealing a tattoo so faded it was barely visible. 5 birds in flight, arranged in a V formation. But one of the birds was falling, wings broken. Tommy Huang drew this on all of us with a needle and India ink. Said if we were going to be ghosts, we should at least haunt together. His voice dropped. Tommy was 22. Had a wife in San Francisco he'd married 3 days before shipping out. She never found out how he died because officially, he was never in Cambodia. More people had noticed the confrontation now. Several officers near the gate were watching. The Navy woman from earlier was speaking urgently into a phone. Martinez, perhaps sensing he'd crossed a line, tried to reassert authority. "Sir, I don't care about your tattoos or your stories. You need to—" "December 15th, 1969, James interrupted. "Operation Crimson Dawn. Extraction of a CIA asset from a village 40 clicks inside Cambodia. Everything went wrong. Our helicopters took RPG fire coming in. Tommy's bird went down hard. We fought for 6 hours to get to the crash site. His hands were shaking now, but not from age. Bobby Chen and Mike Patterson died trying to secure a perimeter. Rich and I finally got to Tommy. He was—" James paused, swallowing hard. The impact had crushed his legs. He knew he wasn't making it out. So he gave me his wedding ring, made me promise to get it to his wife, made all of us promise that the last man standing would remember. Sir. But here's the thing. Lance Corporal Martinez. I couldn't give his wife that ring. Because according to the United States government, her husband died in a training accident at Fort Bragg. They gave her a flag and a fabricated story about a helicopter malfunction in North Carolina. The distant crack of rifle fire made them both turn. The 21-gun salute had begun. James straightened, ignoring the burning pain in his prosthetic leg, and rendered a salute that would have made any drill instructor proud. Martinez stood awkwardly, unsure whether to continue his harassment or retreat. That's when he noticed something that made his blood chill. Behind them, walking with purposeful strides, was Admiral Thomas Crawford, Judge Advocate General of the Navy, and his face was pale as death. As the rifle volleys echoed across Arlington, James slowly reached into his jacket again. This time, he pulled out 4 items, laying them carefully on the grass beside him. Martinez watched, confused, as the old man arranged them with reverent precision. A tarnished Zippo lighter with Tommy scratched into the side. A challenge coin unlike any Martinez had ever seen. No unit insignia, just a phoenix rising from flames. A small Buddha statue, chipped and worn, with Bobby C. carved in the base. And finally, a leather cord holding 5 small brass casings, not American rounds, but Soviet 7, 62x39, AK-47 rounds. James knelt. A slow, painful process that took nearly 30 seconds. His prosthetic leg couldn't bend properly, so he had to adjust, compensate, adapt, just like always. "What are you doing?" Martinez asked, his earlier hostility replaced by something else. Uncertainty, maybe. "Saying goodbye," James whispered. He touched each item gently. "Tommy's lighter. Still has fuel in it. He said it would burn until we all made it home. Bobby's Buddha. He wasn't even Buddhist, just thought it looked cool. Found it in a village we weren't supposed to be in. Mike's coin. We had them made in Saigon. No official markings, nothing that could identify us. Just the Phoenix. And the casings?" James almost smiled. "These are the rounds Rich dug out of me after I caught an AK burst pulling Tommy from the helicopter. 5 rounds, 5 brothers. He kept them all these years, gave them back to me last time I saw him. Said I should keep them until..." He paused. "Until it was time to give them back." Taps began to play, the mournful notes floating across the cemetery like ghosts themselves. James closed his eyes, and for a moment, Martinez saw something that made him step back. Tears. Not many. Just 2, tracking down weathered cheeks. The kind of tears that have waited 50 years to fall. "Sir?" Martinez started, but stopped. What was there to say? James began to speak, so quietly Martinez had to lean in to hear. "Michael Patterson, Thomas Huang, Robert Chen, Richard Richardson, James Morrison." He touched each item as he spoke each name. "Phoenix Squadron. We lived in the shadows so others could stand in the light. We fought in places that didn't exist against enemies we never engaged. We bled red blood on foreign soil that was never marked on any map." He pulled out a small folding shovel from his bag, the kind soldiers carried for decades. With shaking hands, he began to dig a small hole in the soft earth. "What are..." Martinez began. "They can keep me from the funeral," James said softly. "They can deny we existed. They can classify our service until the sun burns cold. But they can't stop me from burying my brothers." One by one, he placed the items in the hole. The lighter, the coin, the Buddha, the casings. Each one kissed gently before being laid to rest. That's when Martinez noticed the figure standing 10 feet behind them. He hadn't heard him approach. Impressive for a man wearing full-dress whites with enough ribbons to stock a craft store. Admiral Crawford stood silently, his face a mask of controlled emotion. His eyes were fixed on the small ritual taking place, on the bent figure of the old man burying memories in Arlington soil, and clutched in the Admiral's right hand was a photograph, faded, creased, but visible. 5 men in unmarked uniforms standing by a helicopter, the same photograph James had shown at the gate. Martinez started to speak, to alert James to the Admiral's presence, but Crawford raised a hand sharply, shaking his head. "Not yet. Let the old warrior finish his goodbye." James finished covering the small grave with dirt, patting it down with hands that had done this too many times before. He struggled to stand, his prosthetic leg catching in the soft earth. Martinez, without thinking, reached out to help. James accepted with quiet dignity. "Thank you, son." That's when Admiral Crawford spoke. "Phoenix Force 7 actual." James froze. His entire body went rigid, as if electricity had shot through him. Slowly, impossibly slowly, he turned around. Crawford stood at perfect attention. "Phoenix Force 7 actual, do you authenticate?" James's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Crimson Dawn. Authentication, Lima Whiskey 997. Crawford's composure finally cracked. "My God, it really is you." Martinez looked between the two men, completely lost. "Admiral, I don't understand." 54 years ago, Crawford said, his voice thick with emotion, "I was Lieutenant Tom Crawford, Naval Intelligence, attached to Mac V. SOG. I was 24 years old, green as grass, and so classified I didn't even know what my actual job was supposed to be." He stepped closer to James, still clutching the photograph. "December 15th, 1969. I was the asset Phoenix Squadron was sent to extract. The CIA had burned me, left me to die in that village. The NVA had my location. I was 18 hours from being tortured to death." James stared at him. "You were the package?" "I was the package." Crawford's voice broke slightly. 5 men I'd never met flew into hell to pull out one junior intelligence officer who'd stumbled onto something he shouldn't have. And when it all went wrong, when by every measure of logic and tactics you should have aborted, "We don't leave people behind," James said simply. 3 of your men died saving someone they'd never met. You lost your leg. And when we finally made it to the extraction point, you know what your team leader, Richardson, you know what he said to me?" James shook his head slightly. "He said, 'Don't thank us. Just remember us. Because nobody else will.'" Crawford turned to Martinez, and his voice became sharp with command. "Lance Corporal, do you know what saved intelligence Phoenix Squadron's sacrifice provided?" "No, sir." "The location of 17 POW camps. The real names of 43 American soldiers listed as MIA who were actually being held in Laos. The identity of a double agent who would have compromised half our operations in Southeast Asia." His voice rose. "The intelligence that James Morrison lost his leg protecting saved over 300 American lives." He turned back to James. "And for 54 years I've carried the weight of knowing that the men who saved me could never be acknowledged. Their families were lied to. Their sacrifice was erased. Their unit was disbanded and disavowed." "Admiral," Martinez stammered, he's not on the list." "Lance Corporal Martinez," Crawford's voice could have cut steel. "Do you see that hill over there? The one with the perfect view of this ceremony?" "Yes, sir. In exactly 3 minutes, I'm going to halt the funeral proceedings. I'm going to inform the Secretary of Defense, who's sitting in the front row, that we have a Phoenix Squadron survivor present. And then, Lance Corporal, we're going to do something that should have been done 50 years ago." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a set of orders. "By the authority vested in me as Judge Advocate General, and with the full backing of the Secretary of Defense who signed these papers this morning after I called him at 500, I hereby officially recognize the existence of Phoenix Squadron, Special Activities Division, MACV SOG. James's legs nearly gave out. Martinez caught him again. "Furthermore," Crawford continued, "all members of Phoenix Squadron are hereby granted full military honors, retroactive to 1969. Their families will receive corrected death certificates. Their names will be added to the appropriate memorials. And their sole surviving member—" He turned to James, and this time he was the one with tears in his eyes. "Their sole surviving member will take his rightful place at this funeral, not as a guest, but as an honor guard. Because Rich asked me, if you ever showed up, to make sure you carried his flag." The funeral had indeed stopped. Every eye was now turned toward the small group on the hill. The Secretary of Defense was standing, shading his eyes to see better. I can't," James whispered. "My leg, I can't march." "You carried wounded men through jungle with that leg. You stood here for an hour with that leg. You can make it 50 more yards." Crawford's voice was gentle now. "Your brothers are waiting." The walk down from the hill took forever, and no time at all. Admiral Crawford on one side, a transformed Lance Corporal Martinez on the other, James Morrison moved toward the funeral he'd been denied. As they approached, officers began standing. First one, then another, then entire rows. The whisper of Phoenix Squadron rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat. The Secretary of Defense met them at the edge of the ceremonial area. Without a word, he removed his own black beret, Special Forces, James noted with surprise, and placed it on his chest in salute. "Sergeant Major Morrison," he said formally, "your nation owes you a debt it can never repay, but we can start trying." "I'm not a sergeant major," James said quietly. "I was discharged as a staff sergeant." "No," the secretary replied. "You were discharged as a ghost." The real James Morrison was promoted in the field by Lieutenant Richardson after the Crimson Dawn operation. That promotion was classified along with everything else. "You've been a sergeant major for 54 years. You just didn't know it." They reached the casket. Rich's widow, Elizabeth, stood there, gray-haired, dignified, confused by the interruption. She looked at James without recognition for a moment, then her eyes widened. "James? Jimmy Morrison?" "Oh my God," Rich said. "He said you might come. He said if you did, I should give you this." She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope, aged and yellowed. James's name was written on it in Rich's distinctive handwriting. With trembling fingers, James opened it. Inside was a single paragraph. "Jimmy, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you're the last Phoenix. I know you, brother. I know you're standing somewhere outside the fence, honoring that damned promise we all made. But here's my last order to you. Step inside, carry my flag, tell our story. Let Tommy and Bobby and Mike finally come home. The war's over, Jimmy. All of them. It's time for Phoenix Squadron to rise from the ashes. Rich." James couldn't see through the tears now. Real tears. The kind that washed away 50 years of hidden grief. "Mrs. Richardson," the Admiral said gently. "Sergeant Major Morrison was with your husband in Cambodia. He saved Rich's life multiple times. Rich saved his. They were brothers in everything but blood." Elizabeth Richardson stepped forward and took James's weathered hands in hers. "He talked about you. Not often. He couldn't. But sometimes, late at night, he'd wake up calling names. Tommy, Bobby, Mike, and Jimmy." She squeezed his hands. "He said Jimmy would understand the ghosts." The honor guard captain approached. "Sir, if you're ready." James looked at him blankly. "To carry the flag, sir." Colonel Richardson requested that if any Phoenix Squadron member attended, they should have the honor. The next few minutes blurred together, the flag being lifted from the casket, the careful ceremonial folding, and then the impossible weight of it in James's arms. Not heavy in pounds, but in years, in memories, in promises kept. As taps played again, James stood at the head of the casket. Around him, the other members of the honor guard, young men and women who could have been his grandchildren, stood at perfect attention. And for the first time in 54 years, Phoenix Squadron was recognized. The Admiral leaned in close. "The President signed an executive order this morning. There's going to be a memorial. Not just a stone, but a full memorial. Phoenix Squadron, Ghost Birds, Prairie Fire, all the units that never existed. Their names will be carved in black granite. Tommy Huang, Michael Patterson, Robert Chen, Richard Richardson," James whispered. "All of them. Every name we can verify. Every ghost we can bring home." As the ceremony concluded, something extraordinary happened. Throughout the cemetery, other elderly men began stepping forward. Men with the same haunted eyes, the same weathered faces, the same invisible scars. Veterans of other units that had never existed, operations that never happened, wars that were never fought. They came to James Morrison, one by one. Not speaking, just nodding, just acknowledging, just understanding. Lance Corporal Martinez watched it all, and finally understood what he'd almost destroyed. He approached James as the crowd began to disperse. "Sergeant Major, I'm sorry, I'm so fucking sorry." James looked at him with those ancient eyes. You did your job, son. Can't fault a Marine for that. I called you a liar. I said stolen valor. You reminded me why we fought, James interrupted. So young men like you could stand guard without knowing what horror looks like. Could challenge old men at gates without wondering if they'd carried your father out of a jungle. He handed Martinez something. The challenge coin Crawford had returned to him, the Phoenix. Keep it, James said. Remember it. That's all we ever wanted, to be remembered. As James Morrison walked out of Arlington that day, he walked differently, not younger. Nothing could give him back those years. Not without pain. That was etched too deep. But for the first time in 54 years, he walked without shadows. Phoenix Squadron had finally come home. Behind him, at a freshly covered grave, 5 small items lay buried in Arlington soil. But they weren't secrets anymore. They were seeds, and from them, memory would grow. On a small hill overlooking it all, a new sign would soon be placed. In honor of those who served in silence, fought in shadows, and died as ghosts. Your country remembers. Phoenix Squadron Memorial Garden, dedicated 2024. But James Morrison didn't need to see that to know the truth. The last ghost had finally stepped into the light. And somewhere, in whatever comes after, 4 brothers were finally at peace. Thank you for typing honor. If you know a veteran whose service was classified, erased, or forgotten, share this story. Subscribe for more tales of dignity. Support our mission through Buy Me a Coffee. Link in the first pinned comment. Until next time, some promises transcend death itself.